Welcome to another episode of Faith Unaltered / Three Crowns, collaborating with Real Seekers on what is sure to be an interesting yet more focused on the history discussion. So, with that being said, Del Glover is joining us, and we are going to be talking about the Quran, specifically Surah and Ayah 4, Surah 4, Ayah 157. Now, there's a context. Obviously, we're not going to rip this passage out of its context and do cherry picking and I said Jesus and all that nonsense, right? But we are going to address these claims. Del has a really good presentation lined up. And then after the presentation, we're just going to kind of talk about it. And this is going to be in a collab effort with the one and only Dr. Shabir Ali. So Dr. Shabir Ali is coming on to discuss this very thing, as well as the Trinity, on May 21st. And that's going to be at 7 p.m. Eastern. Is that right?
It's from 7 till 9:15 p.m. Eastern.
Okay. I was getting ready to say 4, but I was like, no, that's the William Lane Craig episode that we just did. So, okay, Shabir's at 7. All right, 7 p.m. Eastern time. So this is technically like a part 1. And so what prompted this discussion was I received a comment on one of our 3 Crown videos from, I'm assuming, now I invited this person on to have a discussion with us. They rejected and they didn't get back with me, so I took that as a rejection. But they said that Jesus never died, and it was posted on a short that I had put up with Dane, and they said, well, too bad Jesus never died, or something to that effect. And I said, well, what's your proof? And they said, Surah 4, 157. And I said, okay, well, let's talk about that. And anyway, so that's what led to this. But before we get started, Dane, brother, you came up. We saw each other this weekend.
We did.
So how was your trip?
Congratulations to you and to your family. Your baptism into the Orthodox Church. It was beautiful to be there to celebrate with you and to witness it. And really just excited for you and your family and the journey that you're on with your faith and your spirituality. So that was really cool. And I wish we'd gotten to hang out longer. But we also got to take our families to a pretty fun little, children's play spot. And
I had fun.
It was fun. It was really cool. I mean, how can you not have fun where there's a bunch of, screaming kids, slides, ball pits, water play stations? I mean, dude,
they had a big sand pit that we didn't even get to. So the place we're talking about is Dig and Roll. It's in Evansville, Indiana. And if y'all they're not paying us to say this, but if y'all live in the Evansville area and have not been to Dig and Roll, it's not super cheap, but it's not super expensive either. So I think we spent maybe $60 for all of us getting in, and I'm talking about me and Dane together. I think we spent something like $60 for 2 big pizzas, and then to get in. And then what's cool is it's so big that the parents can actually play with the kids. And so that's that. I like that aspect of it because I'm a kid at heart. So
yeah, you gotta enter the kingdom of heaven like a child. So if you're not a kid at heart, you probably haven't fully embraced the gospel. So
there's gonna be a ball pit in heaven. Is all I'm saying.
There's gotta be. In a very large one, an extremely large one. But in all seriousness, it was really cool to be there with you. And I know that you got to take Eucharist in the Orthodox Church for the first time. And I know that's really powerful and meaningful. And for those of you watching, you can also address Tyler as Polycarp, because that is also his name now. And that's why he's got the icon of Polycarp looking over his shoulder, to remind him that his patron saint is there for him and praying for him and all that good stuff. So, but no, I'm really excited about Dale's presentation here tonight. I have for a long time wanted to dive into the topic of Islam on Faith Unaltered and especially on 3 Crowns. And part of the reason why is because Islam is actually it's actually something near and dear to my heart in a lot of ways, because it's a giant mission field. And the people who adhere to Islam and the Muslim, people in general, they're very pious. They're very devout. They are religious, and I want to see them converted to Christ, because if we could get that zeal and that piety and that devotion into the church, focused on the triune God, focused on the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that would be a wave of such great spiritual power within the church. And so I wish that Christians would have a bigger heart for the Muslim community. I wish that we would see them as brothers and sisters to be, right? Future brothers and sisters. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times we sort of play into caricatures and feed the narrative of they're all extremists or whatever, this or that, when most Muslims are really God-fearing people. They're just not fearing the fullness of the revelation of God in Jesus Christ. And I want to introduce them to the fullness of the revelation of God in Jesus Christ. And so I'm excited to talk to Shabir Ali, and even more so, I'm excited for whatever Muslim audiences out there listening that maybe will drop a kernel of truth in them that starts to spring up into a great tree. And so it starts here tonight with Dale's presentation. We're going to be talking about what the Quran says about the crucifixion or lack thereof, and we will try to address this, thoughtfully and critically, and then pose our own position as well, that Jesus did die on the cross. So, yeah, real cool. I'm glad to be here, Tyler.
Amen. And, before I hand it over to Dale real quick to intro him and to get started, I just want to say, this is the center portion of our faith, right? The crucifixion, the resurrection. Don't get me wrong, Jesus is the center portion of our faith, right? And so his life, but his death plays an extremely crucial role in our salvation, right?
Yeah, I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified.
Right. And that's St. Paul. So with that being said, this is something I say that to say this is an episode that we have fun with other episodes, and I'm not going to say we're not going to have fun with this one, but this is a more serious, because of the primary issues that are involved. And so what Dale's going to do, and I'll let him intro and then explain for himself, kind of give a brief summary of his presentation, and then we'll dive in. But we're looking at the Quran just like we would look at the Bible to determine whether it's telling the truth or not, and whether or not it's reliable, and that we're going to apply the historical method to the Quran tonight. And so with that being said, one more thing real quick. This is, so for anybody that's interested, by the way, you can look, y'all, this shirt, only a select few people have this shirt, and I might be endangering my own life just by saying this, guys, tonight. And this is the official, from Southern Seminary itself, the official A.T. Robertson Secret Society shirt that you can only get if you take one of Dr. Robert Plumer's classes on Greek or New Testament or whatever. He's been offering Greek classes through the Daily Dose of Greek, which is how I got this. But if you get 100% or more, because he gives extra credit and bonus questions on your test, on your final, if you get 100% or more, you can join the A.T. Robertson Secret Society just like me. So I'm kind of, not only am I an Orthodox Christian infiltrating this Protestant secret society, right? But I'm also now promoting it online, and it's going out to everybody in the world. So y'all know about the secret society now. There are secret societies in the world, y'all, and I am a part of one of them. So we might do an expose later on in the future. But with all that being said, Dale, brother, welcome, my friend. How are you doing?
Thank you. And Tyler is his address is 440 Indiana.
Yeah, there you go. Email your hate mail to davidrussell@gmail.com.
There you go. So, yeah. So, obviously this Islam is an important topic for me because I'm not only am I friends with Shabir Ali, he was someone who helped me during my own religious research phase before I came to Christ in 2018. I was doing my research as a general theist, and Islam in 2017, there was a time, a couple months there, where it looked to me like Islam was probably true, and Shabir was a big part in that aspect, right? So
Yeah.
I think that Islam is a faith we need to take seriously. We need to care about Muslims as now that I know Christianity is true. I want them to know the truth. I want to share the gospel with them, and part of that message, as Dane and Tyler have said, is the fact that Jesus did die due to crucifixion. And obviously, as per this Muslim objection, that's something they deny. And that's what we're going to be getting into tonight, is looking into this claim from a historical perspective. Does the Islamic claim stand up to scrutiny, or is Christianity in line with historical truth? So that's what we have in store for today.
Right on, Dale. Well, I am so glad that both of you guys are here to talk about this extremely important subject. And so what I'm going to do now is hand it over to you, Dale. If you want to go ahead and share your screen, we can jump right into it.
Okay.
And by the way, while Dale's pulling that up, I will just say, if y'all have questions for us, please shoot us at Faith Unaltered. Please put that at, because that makes it pop up orange on our on the live chat here, so we can see it a little bit better. So if you have any questions, put at Faith Unaltered, ask your question in regards to this. Please share this video around. If you are in Muslim or Islam Facebook groups or any other social media groups where Islam or Muslims interact, please share this video there. We're hoping to start reaching a broader demographic that includes Muslims. So please, if you would, share this video, give us a like, a thumbs up if you're enjoying Faith Unaltered, 3 Crowns, and Real Seekers content. And with that being said, Dale,
all right,
take it away.
Sounds good. All right, cool. So the historicity of Jesus' crucifixion, the Bible versus the Quran. So in the first place, as we've kind of already pointed out, we have to figure out what are the claims. What is traditional Christianity claim versus traditional Islam? So traditionally, Christians have made the claim that Jesus Christ actually died due to Roman crucifixion at the hands of Pontius Pilate at the instigation of the Jewish leadership. And proof of this claim can come straight from the Bible. The Gospels talk about it, such as the Gospel of John, chapter 19, verses 16 to 18, which speaks about Jesus actually being crucified, quote unquote. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is accomplished," or "it is finished." With that, he bowed his head and he gave up his spirit. In other words, he was dead. So the Bible, the Christian Bible in the New Testament, is crystal clear on this fact. Now, Muslims, on the other hand, have traditionally claimed the opposite. They claim Jesus of Nazareth did not die on the cross, and this is consistent with their Quran, specifically Surah 4, or chapter 4, Ayah 157. So just to quote the context for you in full, the Quran says, starting in verse 155, they, meaning the Jews, were condemned for breaking their covenant, rejecting Allah's signs, killing the prophets unjustly, and for saying, "Our hearts are unreceptive. It is Allah who has sealed their hearts for their disbelief. So they do not believe except for a few, and for their denial, an outrageous accusation against Mary, the mother of Jesus, is who it's talking about." And then we come to the key verse. "And for boasting, we killed the Messiah, Jesus, the son of Mary, the messenger of Allah. But they neither killed nor crucified him. It was only made to appear so. Even those who argue for this crucifixion are in doubt themselves. They have no knowledge whatsoever, only making assumptions. They certainly did not kill him." So we have a clear contradiction in terms of what the Quran versus what the Bible claims, and how traditionally Christians and Muslims have interpreted these passages. So great. Now we understand what the difference is. How do we get to the bottom of this? And the first thing I just want to say, though, is in terms of Islam, there is actually a question. Some Islamic scholars, they are a minority, but such as Gabriel Said Reynolds has argued in a scholarly paper that Jesus, the Quran is not denying that Jesus died, not even that he died by crucifixion. In fact, he makes references elsewhere in the Quran where it uses the Arabic word tawafa, which means everywhere else. It means to die, literally to die. And the Quran uses this specifically of Jesus. So what Gabriel Said Reynolds argues is, look, it's not denying that Jesus died or was crucified. It's denying that the Jews were the ones that crucified him. No, because it was the Romans that actually did it. So that's Gabriel Said Reynolds' scholarly argument. And he wrote that in a peer-reviewed paper called The Muslim Jesus, Dead or Alive. And that's for free on my blog website at this web link here. But yeah, I just want to play, in order to understand, it is clear elsewhere that the Quran does seem to say Jesus actually died. And specifically, that there was a separation of Jesus' soul and his body through this Arabic verb that's used here. So let me just have Islamic apologist, polemicist Jay Smith talk about some of these contradictions in this clip.
I thought he was about to say Jay Dyer.
Jay Dyer. No, Jay Smith. I actually like Jay Smith. Jay Dyer, no. All right, so this is about a 4-minute clip. Oops.
In Surah 19, Ayah 33, the Quran contradicts himself on this very point. In Surah 19, Ayah 33, Surah 19, Ayah 33 is very clear. And this is Jesus speaking in Surah 19, and he says this, and let me read it so that I get it correct. And salam, in other words, peace, be upon me the day I was born. Who are we talking about? Well, you need to go right back to the verse 30 and also verse 31 and verse 32, which is referring to Jesus. He, Jesus, said, verily I am the slave of Allah. So this is Jesus speaking. So verse 33, and salam be upon me the day I, Jesus, was born, the day I die, and the day I be raised alive.
Die?
Yeah, so
and raised alive?
Jesus is claiming that he's going to die and raise alive. Wow. That contradicts Surah 4:157.
That's right.
Pretty clear, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
What Muslims will say, they'll say, no, this is the future. But there's no future tense in the Arabic.
How do you know
this
that?
is present continuous.
How do you know that?
Well, let's look at the Arabic. And the Arabic's very clear. It's present continuous. And what is more, just look at verse 15.
Mm-hmm.
Because in verse 15, you have the same thing said of John the Baptist in verse 15. And this time, it's third person singular. And it's saying, salam, John the Baptist, is Yahya, peace on him the day he was born and the day he dies and the day he will rise up to life.
Wow.
Now, is John Baptist going to come back in the future?
No.
He did die.
Yeah.
Everybody knows he died. He had his head cut off.
Yes.
Salome, remember the dancer, and Herod had his head cut off because she danced so well. So nobody believes in verse 15 that he's going to rise again or die and rise again. So why do you impose that on verse 33? So you can see Muslims have a hard time trying to exegete this. But what the real verse, the one that really is problematic, and this is rather curious, because in Surah 3, Ayah 55, you really have the, as far as I'm concerned, a cover-up going on in the Quran. Not the Quran itself, but in the translation of the Quran. In Surah 3, Ayah 55, it says this. Let's start from the beginning. And when Allah said, now verse 54, it's talking about Jesus. So this is Jesus again. So, and when Allah said, O Isa, I will make you sleep and raise you to myself and clear you of those who disbelieve. I will make you to sleep and raise you to myself.
Wow.
Now, that seems like he just went to sleep.
Yeah.
What does the Arabic say?
I don't know.
Now, you know Arabic, do you not?
Yes. I can understand.
The word in Arabic is mutawafika. What does mutawafika mean?
Actually, that particular word I don't know.
Actually,
you'll have to explain it to me.
It means to kill.
Uh-huh.
Tawafa. to kill.
Wow.
It's very clear. Anybody that speaks Arabic, it says, I will kill you and take you to myself. Now, prior to 1935, every English translation said that, I will kill you and take you to myself. And then around the 1930s, all the English translations were changed to, I will put you to sleep. Now, you can't do that. You can't take Arabic and then impose your own translation to eradicate.
So I think you get the hint here, right? So basically, this is the first point, is that if you don't take Gabriel Said Reynolds' more scholarly, nuanced interpretation, which is a modern one, and you go with the traditional understanding, the Quran contradicts itself. You have contradictions in the Quran because it is clear. It used the clear Arabic verb, tawafa, to mean kill. And it talks about Jesus being killed and even rising from the dead. So this is an interesting kind of conundrum for the Muslim who takes a traditional interpretation of Surah 4, Ayah 157, as saying it's denying Jesus died or was crucified altogether. You've got to reconcile these seemingly contradictory verses then. Okay, beyond that, though, beyond just pointing out contradictions in the Quran, we can also prove as secular historians, using secular historical criteria, who's actually got the truth. Is the Christian claim correct, or is the Islamic claim correct? On this front, I'm going to do my role as an influencer, official influencer, and help raise awareness about my friend, Dr. Gary Habermas's brand new book on the resurrection evidences. Volume 1 is now available on Amazon, and Volume 2 will be out shortly on the various historical hypotheses. But right now, Volume 1 is out, and that gives a great amount of detail on the historical facts and how we can determine them. And on the fact of Jesus' death by crucifixion, Gary Habermas outlines no less than 12 scholarly lines of argumentation based on the historic method and historical evidence, which all secular historians would accept. And this proves beyond all reasonable doubt that the historical Jesus did in fact die due to Roman crucifixion. So the first argument here is clear. We have scholarly consensus. It is nearly universal. Virtually everyone with a PhD in history, classics, biblical studies, early Christianity, Roman history, whatever it is, everyone agrees. And regardless of worldview, we have atheists and agnostics, and we have Christians, Jews, even Muslims will agree to this as a fact against their own religion. But as scholars, they'll admit it is a proven fact. Jesus died due to Roman crucifixion. And here's just a couple of examples. We have the liberal atheist, Dr. John Dominic Crossan. And I call him an atheist. He wouldn't call himself that, but he is. If you asked him, did God exist in 65 million BC? His answer is no. So he believes God's just a creation of the human mind. So he's an atheist, okay? So, and he is the leader of the Skeptical Jesus Seminar. Even he says, quote unquote, Jesus' death by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate is as sure as anything historical can ever be. The non-religious agnostic, Dr. Bart Ehrman, this is a favorite scholar that Muslims love to go to when trying to refute the Gospels and pointing out contradictions. Well, even Bart Ehrman would say Jesus' death by crucifixion is one of the most well-attested facts in human history. Now, how do historians go about determining this? Well, there are various signs or criteria of historicity that all secular historians use. And I'm going to outline some of these for you and show why secular historians, not just evangelical Christians, admit this is a historical fact. And my first argument here is from what's called the criterion of dissimilarity. So this is saying that something that is dissimilar to what Christians or later gospel writers would have wanted to report on, if it's dissimilar from that, it's almost like different from how they would do it, then it's probably reflecting authentic tradition. And not only that, there's also the criterion of multiple independent attestation on this front. So what is this fact that I'm talking about? It's the sign on the cross. Remember, in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek, it called Jesus by the title King of the Jews. And this is dissimilar to early Christian titles for Jesus. And that's why we know it's probably historical. If you don't believe me, let me quote Bart Ehrman's best buddy, liberal biblical scholar. This is someone who denies the bodily resurrection of Christ. He's no friend to conservative Christians like me, Dan, and Tyler here. But even Dale Martin admits this is a proven fact in his lecture series at Yale University. Let me just play that clip until the 33:28. Okay. So here's Dale Martin. Okay.
Here are some things that I think we can agree about. Most historians might agree about that historical Jesus. And then I'll tell you how we got there. So we're going to talk about
Can
first
you guys hear
results
that?
and then some methodology. First.
Can you guys hear that? Tyler?
Yeah. Yeah.
You can?
I can hear it.
Good.
The sign on the cross. Does anybody remember what the sign on the cross when Jesus is crucified says? Pardon? Say it again. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Anybody else? What did you say? Not here lies, but there's one verse that says, this is Jesus of Nazareth. And it's because the 4 different Gospels have slightly different wording, but they all have something version of Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, which is, of course, why you sometimes see this abbreviated from the Latin, right? If you've seen it in churches, Inri, have you ever seen that on a cross or something like that in a church? Jesus of Nazareth in Latin, Rex, King Judaeorum of the Jews. So that, notice how though it's slightly different. Let's look, if you've got your Bibles, it's Mark 15:26. If you've got a parallel version, I'm going to be looking at Throckmorton because it has the synoptic parallels. It's Throckmorton, paragraph 249. But somebody put your finger on Mark 15:26. It's also Matthew 27:37. It's also Luke 23:38. And it's also John 19:19. Now in Mark 15:26, it says, the inscription of the charge against him read, the King of the Jews. That's it. Then it goes on about this stuff. Look over right next to it on Matthew. It says, over his head they put the charge against him and said, this is Jesus, the King of the Jews. So it's slightly different. Luke 23, what did I say? 38. There it is, There was also an inscription over him, this is the King of the Jews. And who has the John version? John 19:19. Did anybody put their finger on John 19:19? Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And doesn't it say in John that it was in different languages? Or am I forgetting? That's right, Hebrew, Latin, and Greek in the Gospel of John. So that's what we've got. One of the things that most scholars will say is, we think that's historical. And why do we think it's historical? Well, for one thing, it comes from at least 2 independent sources, right? What are the 2 independent sources that it comes from? It's in all 4 Gospels, but all 4 Gospels aren't independent sources, are they? Why? Because we believe that Matthew and Luke used Mark. So if Matthew and Luke copied it from Mark, that makes Mark one source. Did the author of John use the Gospel of Mark? Not according to the theory we're using in this class. Some people might say yes, some scholars might say yes, but in this class we're going on the theory that the Gospel of John probably didn't use Mark as one of his sources. So you've got the Gospel of John as one source for this. You've got the Gospel of Mark as another source for this. So you have 2 of what scholars are willing to treat as independent sources, which both have this nice little piece of data, this datum right there. Now the other thing is that might be interesting to for you to know, King of the Jews is not a Christological title that early Christians used about Jesus. Remember in the Gospels, we've seen a lot of different titles for Jesus. He's the teacher. He's the Son of God. He's the Messiah. He's the Holy One of Israel, we just saw. He has a lot of things, and these things are obviously things. Early Christians called him Lord. They called him Son of God. But they didn't call him King of the Jews. It was one of the titles of Jesus that apparently the earliest followers of Jesus didn't latch onto. So we don't see it in the letters of Paul, and we don't see it elsewhere in the Gospels. So what scholars have said is, look, this thing, King of the Jews, doesn't look like a Christological confessional title that Christians made up and then put into the gospel.
So I think you guys get the point there, right? About this title, King of the Jews. This is attesting to the fact that this is a historical datum that we know for sure that Jesus was put on the cross, and this sign and title, King of the Jews, was placed over that cross. This is why secular scholars, even liberals like Dale Martin, admit you can't deny this as a fact. Now, in terms of the criteria of authenticity, other reasons to believe that the crucifixion stories themselves directly are important is, again, from use of this criterion of multiple independent attestation, right? Because we have these at least two or more independent sources. And agnostic scholar Bart Ehrman has actually been documented as saying there are a total of 20 independent sources, all attesting to Jesus, and a whopping 15 of which attest to Jesus' death by crucifixion specifically. All of these date within the first 100 years of Christ. This is incredible evidence. 10 of these are directly in the New Testament, and 5 are actually extra biblical. And Gary Habermas in his volume lists all of those sources for you there. But there's another criterion here as well that's also used, that's not always mentioned. But in addition to having multiple independent sources, there's also multiple forms speaking about Jesus' death by crucifixion. So it's not just all straightforward Greco-Roman biography in the Gospels. No, it comes in different forms, such as hymns, oral creeds in 1 Corinthians 15. It's in narrative history. It's in sermon summaries in Acts of the Apostles. It's talked about in parables. It's even in the apocalyptic genre in Revelation. And it's also included in epistles, such as in Paul's epistles. So there are a variety of forms, all attesting that this belief that Jesus died by crucifixion is extremely early testimony, going all the way back to the eyewitnesses themselves. And we also have a case of enemy attestation, which is another historical criteria of authenticity, because the Jewish leaders, they were essentially providing an apparent polemic against Christians. And we can kind of see in the Gospel of Matthew, specifically that story about the guard at the tomb, a kind of development. According to non-conservative Christian scholars, there's this development of, hey, the tomb is empty. What do you have to say about that, Jew? Well, you stupid Christian, obviously the disciples stole the body. And then what do you say about that, you stupid Christian? And then I forget where I am. But then the Jew comes back and says, or Christian comes back and says, oh, you fool, we had a guard. There was a guard at the tomb. We couldn't have stolen the body. Oh, there was a guard. Yeah, but they fell asleep. And then they say, oh, but he didn't really fall asleep. The Jewish leaders just bribed them to say that. So there's this back and forth polemic against Christians and Jews on this claim, presupposing Jesus' death and then his body being put into a tomb and it being found empty afterwards. And this is enemy attestation. We can see through this how the enemies of the early Christians, the Jewish leaders, were responding to these claims. And this claim about the empty tomb presupposes that there was a dead body of Jesus. Obviously, he had died on the cross. So I just want to show Dr. William Lane Craig talking about this aspect here. All right, so that's just the full video.
Thank you very much for your work, Dr. Craig. I was wondering if there was absolutely no expectation of a resurrection, of a first century Jew inventing a resurrection, why did the Pharisees put a guard at the tomb to keep the disciples out?
That is one of the main objections to the historicity of Matthew's story. And you notice that that story didn't play any part in the case that I built tonight. Most scholars don't accept the historicity of the guard story. But what is important about the guard story, I think for our purposes, is that closing comment that Matthew makes. This has been spread among the Jews to this day. It shows that Matthew is telling this guard story in order to refute this widespread Jewish allegation that the disciples had come and stolen away the body of Jesus, and that's why the tomb was empty. It wasn't the resurrection, it was body snatching. And so that's the really important historical nugget to take out of the guard story, and why nothing in the case that I presented tonight presupposes the historicity of the guard story. Now, if you were to try to defend the historicity of the guard story, I think you would probably say, of course, the Jewish leaders themselves didn't believe that Jesus was going to rise from the dead, but they may have heard that he predicted such a thing from Judas, who betrayed Jesus and whom they had hired to hand him over. They may have feared that there would be some sort of an event there, and so they wanted a guard place to prevent anything like that. We don't know. But the important thing is that it plays no role in the case for the historicity of the resurrection of Jesus.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right, so yeah, so that's what virtually all historians, regardless of worldview, they take to be the historical kernel. And again, the empty tomb, that's going to be important because that's going to refute a certain Islamic interpretation later on. But in addition, it presupposes there was this dead Jewish body, Jesus' dead body, placed in a tomb, and it was gone. So that part's historical. We also have the criterion of early eyewitness testimony, because between the dates 30 and 50 AD, this represents the earliest oral period when we had oral testimony. It's before any of the writings of the New Testament, from Paul, including Paul's epistle to the First Thessalonians. And we have various oral creeds that predate Paul's writings. The earliest of which is 1 Corinthians, for example, 1 Corinthians 11, verse 23 to 26, which again is about Jesus' Last Supper, presupposing Jesus' death. And 1 Corinthians 15, 3-7, which explicitly mentions that the Lord Jesus died. So both of these creeds are dated by virtually all scholars to Jerusalem, where the eyewitnesses were, before, at the latest, before 40 AD. And some, like the atheist biblical scholar Dr. Gerrit Ludemann, dates it 6 months after Jesus' death by crucifixion. So this is incredibly early and eyewitness testimony here. And the reason scholars can link this to the eyewitnesses is basically through the criterion of embarrassment, right? Because remember that testimony of the women and possibly John the Apostle. It's them who follow Jesus' dead corpse from the cross to Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. And it's the women who help bury Jesus. So they, again, are being presented as the primary eyewitnesses. All of the other male disciples, those cowards, they ran and fled like the little chicken scum that they were. You know, it was the women who were brave and witnessed Jesus actually dying on the cross and witnessed his burial in the tomb. So this fulfills that criterion of embarrassment as well. And following on with this criterion of embarrassment and dissimilarity, here's one of the strongest arguments. This is one of the key arguments that Dr. Bart Ehrman is known for making as a non-religious agnostic who loves to attack Christians and Christianity. Even he says this proves it, right? That it is so embarrassing. The idea of a crucified Jewish Messiah is just impossible to exist in first century Judea, unless what? It actually happened. The early Christians believed Jesus was indeed the Jewish Messiah, and it was just a fact that he was crucified. So they had to report it. So let's hear agnostic Dr. Bart Ehrman make this argument. And there's no timestamp. Okay. Is this Bart Ehrman? No, that's Mike Lacona. Okay, so here's Bart.
Would somebody make up a Messiah, specifically the Messiah, who was crucified? It's important to understand what Jews meant. Paul was a Jew. It's important to understand what Jews meant by the term Christ. In the days of Paul, there were some Jews who were expecting that a Messiah was going to come to the Jewish people sent from God. God would send a Messiah. The word Messiah actually comes from a Hebrew word, Mashiach, which means anointed one. Messiah is the same word as the Greek word Christ. The Hebrew word is Messiah, Greek word Christ. Jews had various expectations of what this Messiah would be, the anointed one. This is a term that was originally used in Jewish scriptures to refer to the king of Israel. He was the anointed one. When the king was anointed at his coronation ceremony, like King David, King Solomon, this showed that God was putting his favor upon him. In Jesus' day, there hadn't been a king on the throne for nearly 600 years. Some people thought there would be a king on the throne, and they called him the anointed one, the Messiah. The Messiah was going to be a great warrior figure like David, a great warrior who drove out the enemy and set up God's kingdom by establishing a throne in Jerusalem, and Israel would once more be a sovereign state that would rule over its enemies. That's what the Messiah would do. Some Jews thought that the Messiah would be a cosmic figure who would destroy the forces of evil and set up God's kingdom on earth, a mighty cosmic judge. There were various expectations of what the Messiah would be, but there was one thing that all of the expectations had in common. Jews who expected a Messiah expected a great, powerful figure who would destroy the enemy and set up God's kingdom. And who was Jesus? The Christians said that Jesus was a crucified criminal. If you wanted to make up a story about the Messiah, would you make up the story that the Messiah had been crucified? That's the opposite of what the Messiah is supposed to be. If you want to make up a story about a Messiah, you'd make up the story that, well, he actually drove out the Romans and he is sitting on the throne in Jerusalem. Why didn't they make up that story? Because it obviously wasn't true. The early Christians were not going around saying that God had been crucified. They were saying that Christ had been crucified. Well, why did they do that? If it didn't make any sense to expect a crucified Messiah. It was because they believed that Jesus was the Messiah and they knew that he got crucified. You can't explain the crucified Messiah as something that was made up. The crucified Messiah is because people thought Jesus was the Messiah, and they knew that this man had been killed as a crucified criminal.
All right, so I think that gets the point across. Again, this is not a Christian, not a friend to conservative Christians. He is an agnostic, Bart Ehrman. So, yeah, so I think, yeah, great. So that does it. This is why secular historians, atheist, agnostic, Christian, Jewish, whatever, all agree that it is a fact of history that Jesus was died due to crucifixion on the cross. Now, it may surprise some in the audience here. If there are any Muslims in the audience, they're kind of chuckling right now and saying, you silly little Christians. Look, I can accept, in terms of your secular historical case that you just laid out, I accept all of it. Every little thing you just said, I accept it, right? But that doesn't prove that Jesus actually historically died due to crucifixion. Why? Because remember what that Quran verse said. It said, but they neither killed nor crucified him. It was only made to appear so. So the early Christians, the Romans, the Jews, they were all deceived. And this explains why the early Christians were making this claim about Jesus. They truly believed it. They thought this was a historical fact. But it wasn't. They were duped because it was made to appear like Jesus crucified them. And even those who argue for his crucifixion are in doubt. They have no knowledge whatsoever. They're only making an assumption, but they certainly didn't kill Jesus. So somehow, some way, the Muslim argument is that the people who supposedly witnessed Jesus die on the cross, it was an illusion. It was a delusion. It was something haywire happened to make them think Jesus died when he really hadn't. And that's consistent with all the historical data and facts that I just presented in the for the secular historical case. So, my gosh, what are we supposed to do on this front? Okay, so Mike Lacona, I'm not sure. Okay, so basically, Muslims give at least 4 different explanations for how could it have been made to appear to these early people that Jesus died due to crucifixion. And there are 2 main types of Islamic explanation. That's consistent with the secular historical data. The first is the swoon theory. So this includes both a natural swoon theory and a supernatural swoon theory. And then there's the substitution theory, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Tyler, I think that's the Muslim who raised the objection. He was specifically arguing for the substitution theory, whereby somebody was swapped out. Either Jesus had a natural twin, or there was a supernatural switcheroo, and Allah made someone look like Jesus to trick people, and it was this switched person that was put up on the cross. It wasn't Jesus himself. Just so I know, Tyler, is it was the Muslim that raised the objection? They went for the substitution theory, correct?
I think Tyler had to go, but
oh goodness, okay.
So he's not with us. He's not here.
Boring?
But I think you're right that the substitution is what the Muslim critic brought up to Tyler in their exchange. No, he said in the private chat he had to run and he'd explain later. So don't know what's going on, but hopefully everything's cool with him. But no, you're doing great. This is really interesting.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Thank you. I'm pretty sure for Tyler, I put him to sleep, but all right.
It's too scholarly.
Okay. All right. Well, let me dumb it down here. So okay. So let's look at the first is Muslim alternative here. The natural swoon theory is this something that could, Jesus was up on the cross. It looked like he was about to die. He was on the verge of death, maybe even had a near-death experience, as some Ahmadiyya Muslims like to say. But then he was taken down, put in the cool tomb, and my gosh, after 3 days, he totally revived, came back to life, and didn't have any problems. He merely swooned. He never actually died. Is this a plausible interpretation of the data? Well, first of all, this kind of natural swoon theory is mainly held by Ahmadiyya Muslims as well as the Nation of Islam. These are minority and considered heretics by the Muslims at large, the Islam at large, like the Sunni Muslims and that sort of thing. But nonetheless, these are groups that do consider this as a possible explanation. And there is even Sunni Islamic apologists such as Ahmed Deedat, who was extremely popular back in the day. And even my friend, Dr. Shabir Ali, he doesn't advocate for this, but he does raise it as a possibility. And he has defended this theory at certain times in debates, such as with Dr. William Lane Craig. And essentially the problem here is that historically, we know, and medically, we just know this is extremely unlikely to be true, because in the first place, it's been proven to be extremely unlikely for victims to survive a crucifixion, even in general. So we have Josephus, the Jewish historian of the first century, and he recounts a story where there was 3 people who were rescued from crucifixion, who were acquaintances of his, and they were rescued relatively immediately, and they were all given the best medical care that was available at that time. And guess what? Only one of them survived. The 2 of them still died, but only one of them just barely survived. So this shows how unlikely it is to survive. Now, if we look and apply that to Jesus' case, remember, Jesus wasn't just crucified. He was severely beaten, dehydrated, probably in hypovolemic shock by the time he even got nailed to the cross itself. He had to carry his cross and that to the Golgotha. And he was left up for hours. There's no way. It is just medically impossible for Jesus to have survived on the cross and just went through a natural swoon theory. It is extremely, extremely improbable a priori.
And hey, Dale, can I ask a question real quick?
Yep.
So also remind me, doesn't the Quran say that he was not crucified? Is that language in there? He was not crucified.
Yes, it does say that as well.
So the swoon theory, he is still crucified. He's just not killed by that action. And so it would seem to still contradict what's going on in the surah there.
Yeah, you can make that argument. I think that works. I have seen some Muslims try to say that it's just emphasizing by crucified. They're just trying to say like, look, he didn't die from that motive.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's like I think the simplest way to read it without having to kind of overly nuance it would be like he wasn't crucified or killed, right? Like it wasn't So anyway, I just think that that's interesting that the swoon theory would have to nuance that in a unusual way as well.
Yeah, and that's true. That's a good line of counter against the Islamic claim who wants to go for this swoon theory, right? All right. And also, look, medically speaking, with modern medical knowledge, there have been actual studies, such as Pierre Barbet, who studied crucified people who were living and dead bodies and corpse, and would try to see how could people survive, how did people die on the cross? How did people die on the cross? Sorry about that. And there are different interpretations as to how someone dies on the cross. You can see here the different ways. This is in a scholarly, peer-reviewed medical journal. Gary Habermas was a co-author on this, and you can see the different ways that the different medical experts have claimed people died. Most claim it's through asphyxiation. You simply can't push yourself up and you die because you can't breathe anymore. You get so tired, you can't push yourself up to open up the airways to breathe in, and you just die. But there are other people who've said that it's probably other factors and stuff, including the person I'm going to quote right now, Dr. Joseph Bergeron, who I've had on my show. So he's just going to describe this natural swoon theory in a 3-minute clip. Okay, perfect.
All right, so I hear everything you're saying. You've kind of answered this next question a bit, but let's kind of stress it. So obviously there are some skeptics and atheists out there, and you've kind of pointed to exceptions like in Josephus. And I have a lot of Muslim listeners, Ahmadiyya Muslims. They believe in what's called the swoon theory. So I want to kind of turn it to you. Like, is it really plausible at all from a medical perspective that Jesus could have lived and swooned on the cross, and then through some combination of alloys or myrrh or something, he would have revived a few days later? Is that even possible from a medical perspective, or what's your take on that?
Well, I've done a lot of courtroom depositions. I told you that earlier. With a reasonable degree of medical certainty, that's not possible. And that would be submissible in a court of law. The reasonable degree, medical probability, more likely than not, is what's accepted in a court of law. But here we're talking about something that we talked about, Roman military discipline. We talked about crucifixion practices. To allow the person to escape death would mean death for them. Beside the fact that the descriptions of Jesus' execution suggest that he was progressing into shock before he ever got to the cross itself, and that death was rapid. And I think the centurion pronouncing death is credible. Okay, so beyond that, what about a spear going through the chest? Who's going to live through that, particularly in the ancient world? Well, they could maybe sew it together with fishing line, but that would be the best they could do.
It's go ahead, Danny.
You're not going to get a situation where 3 days later.
So you can hear Dr. Joseph Bergeron here, a medical expert, kind of showing the lie here that it would just be impossible for Jesus to survive. And I didn't even mention, don't forget that spear wound that pierced Jesus' heart and blood and water came out, which is actually attested to on the Shroud of Turin. And the reason I bring that up, I know I don't usually, I don't want to mix the Shroud of Turin here, but it is relevant for the topic of Islam because Ahmadiyya Muslims, their caliph has officially accepted the Shroud of Turin as authentic. So the Shroud of Turin would count as evidence against this natural swoon theory that is an effective counter to some Muslim groups who advocate for this here. But the final argument, this is probably the best one that I love, it comes from Dr. Gary Habermas, and he's quoting a skeptic from the 1800s named D.F. Strauss. And he says, look, even if, let's just grant the Muslim everything they want, somehow Jesus survived on the cross, and he swooned and he revived 3 days later, and he gets out of the tomb and he marches over to the disciples and knocks on the door. Peter opens up the door, all hopeful, and there's Jesus with his bloody, battered body that he's just barely managed to escape death. Do you seriously think that Peter is going to be the resurrected Christ? Oh my gosh, you are the Lord. You are my Lord and my God. No, he's going to be saying, get the doctor. Oh my, we got to help this guy. We get it. Let's get bandages and help him. You're not going to proclaim the resurrected Christ. That just doesn't make any sense if a natural swoon theory is true. So the natural swoon theory has really been devastatingly defeated and refuted on multiple grounds: historical, based on modern medical evidence, and scientific evidence with the Shroud of Turin, if you accept that. And fourthly, just basic logic and theological common sense with this: no one's going to proclaim a resurrected Christ from a naturally swooned Jesus. So yeah, that's my take on that. Any questions so far, Dane? Or
no, I think you're making a lot of sense, and I agree with you. The natural swoon theory, it just doesn't make any sense when you start to put yourself in the situation. Jesus coming back from a spear going through his heart, with coming back from it without first facing death, right? Doesn't make any sense. And I agree with you. The first thing the apostles would have done is say, we need to get you medical attention and sew up these wounds and bandage you. They wouldn't have said, hey, let's have a fish grill out on the beach, So, I think that the swoon theory doesn't work. And clearly Jesus looked very vibrant and strong and glorious when he came back from the dead. He didn't look like someone who was just utterly hanging on by a thread, beaten to a pulp,
Exactly. Yeah. And, Joseph Bergeron and other medical experts to that modern medical evidence, it really is a total refutation, I would say, too. So, all right, cool. So the next natural thing is the natural substitution theory. So some Muslims have argued that Jesus had a natural born identical twin. This is something that does happen, does happen in our world, right? So that is a plausible answer. But what the Muslims will say is that, okay, his twin was one of his apostles, Thomas, basically Didymus Judas Thomas, which in the Greek, Didymus is Greek for twin, and there's the Thomas is the Hebrew word for twin. Thomas must have been Jesus' identical twin brother, and they crucified who? Thomas, and they mistook it for Jesus, and that's why we have all these historical facts. So basically, they claimed that it was Thomas who was mistaken for Jesus, and it was Thomas who died on the cross in his place. Now, it's important to note that such beliefs are not unique to Muslims and just modern skeptics. They actually originated with Christians, early, not real Christians, but Gnostics, basically. This represents Christian Gnostic thought, and it was the Muslims later on who were copying these Christian Gnostic texts and that. So just for example, something like this is mentioned with respect to Thomas in the Gospel of Thomas, a collection of sayings found near Nag Hammadi. And these are kind of sayings that Jesus is supposed to have entrusted to his twin, Thomas. It's also in the Book of Thomas the Contender, also a Nag Hammadi text that was discovered, where Jesus again addresses the apostle Thomas as his twin, the one who, quote unquote, knows himself. And then finally, there's a book called The Acts of Judas Thomas, and that's an account of the apostle's supposed proselytizing travels over to India. Once again, Ahmadiyya Muslims, they also believe Jesus, after he swooned, where did he go? He went straight off to India to preach to the thing. So this is official Ahmadiyya Muslim teaching, and you can see it. Where is it coming from? These Christian Gnostics. Now, obviously, Jesus having a twin, this is something that would have been known by the other disciples. They would have known, hey, yeah, you two look kind of similar. You guys must be identical twins, right? And obviously, they would realize that Jesus would have tricked the Romans by using Thomas in his place, if this did truly happen, right? And there's ways to tell identical twins apart in their behavior or some kind of mannerism that you can usually, especially if you're spending 3 years with these people, I think the disciples would have developed ways to understand the differences between Thomas and Jesus. And if you want to posit, okay, well, maybe it wasn't Thomas, maybe Jesus had an unknown identical twin brother, unknown to the disciples. Okay, but his family, his brothers and mother would know his twin brother, and the disciples knew Jesus's family and interacted with them and stuff like that. So surely they would have reported if they heard, oh, Jesus died on the cross. Probably the family would say, no, that was actually Thomas. That wasn't Jesus. They switched out. So yeah, there are really just too many implausibilities for this theory to be true. And don't forget that historical fact about the women discovering that empty tomb. If Jesus' twin brother Thomas or someone else was mistaken for Jesus, well, that body's still going to be dead in the tomb. So why was the tomb empty after 3 days? And what happened to Jesus afterwards? Why didn't he stay with the disciples? Why did he only stay with them for 40 days and then vanish, never to be heard from again? What is this guy trying to prove? What's his agenda with this switcheroo and then just disappearing from human history? Why would someone claiming to be the Jewish Messiah concoct such a scheme in the first place? Why would he put himself in danger and then at the last minute check it out and have some substitute, his twin brother, go in his place? Things just don't add up in terms of this natural switcheroo theory. So that's kind of my take on that front.
Yeah, I think there's another thing to ponder with that theory that kind of demolishes it. In the Gospel of John, you have Thomas falling at the feet of the resurrected Christ saying, "My Lord and my God." Now, in this weird natural twin theory, that would actually be Jesus talking to his twin, and so you've flipped who the Lord is, right?
Mhm.
It's no longer Jesus, but it's whoever this twin is. And so, but the gospel calls the one speaking Thomas, right? Not and the one he's speaking to Jesus. So yeah, I think that twin theory falls apart. And
Well, okay. Let me just play a Muslim thing because
sure.
they'll say, yeah, but that's just made up legend. That's not historical. That narrative there, because obviously Thomas died on the cross. So can you prove to me that that narrative of Thomas falling before Jesus is historically true? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so I think that gets into a whole big conversation that's probably wider than what we're doing here tonight around, the historical reliability of the New Testament and the Muslim critic or the Muslim apologist would probably have to make a lot of claims about different sections of the New Testament being corrupted, and that's a whole other can of worms that opens up into so much conspiracy theory, basically that all sorts of Christian scribes got their hands on all these documents, the Latin, the Coptic, the Greek, the Syriac, and they were just changing it all to create the deity of Christ and his crucifixion. It's like the simpler answer is like, this is what the originals actually said. And you to pull off a conspiracy of that scale in the ancient world, I don't even know how you would do it,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, great points. Awesome. So all right, cool. So let's turn away from the natural alternatives. Okay, so I can't maintain naturalism, but guess what? Muslims believe in Allah. They believe in a god-like being who can perform and does perform supernatural miracles. So maybe we can avoid some of these logical and medical problematic features by supposing supernatural versions of these theories. So we can have the supernatural swoon theory, where, sure, medically it's naturally impossible Jesus could survive his treatment on the cross, but no, Allah supernaturally swooned Jesus. So Allah used his power to keep Jesus alive in a near-death state, and then he was supernaturally revived and healed in the tomb. This even takes away D.F. Strauss's argument, because yeah, he would have been supernaturally healed so that he wouldn't, Peter would proclaim the resurrected Christ, not call for the doctor type thing. And then there's also this, oh goodness, is that a mistake? This is supposed to say supernatural substitution theory. So this is, okay, so Jesus didn't have a twin brother or something like that. But let's say Allah supernaturally made someone look like Jesus, and then that person was crucified. And Muslims have come up with a whole range of people, they can say it's just some random unknown person. Others have said, oh, it was Judas Iscariot who was made to look like Jesus, and he was crucified in Jesus' place. And it's kind of, haha, you're the betrayer. Look what you get. Allah gave you justice. Other Muslims have said that it was one of Jesus' disciples. Again, perhaps Thomas was supernaturally made to look like Jesus. So he wasn't a natural born twin, but he was supernaturally made into Jesus' twin and then put up on the cross. I still think that's going to come up with some problems like what Dane mentioned there. Still, others would say it was a Roman soldier named Tituus. So there have been a variety of ideas from Muslims on the supernatural substitution theory and who this poor sucker was that was turned into a Jesus lookalike and then put up on the cross. Now, what do I say about the supernatural scenarios here? So it's true, these do avoid a lot of the problems that the natural ones do, but there are still some problems that persist. So, for example, the Gnostic origins of the supernatural substitution theory, this is still obvious. We can still see it, and the origins of this and the development of these legends and how Muhammad would have gotten a hold of these legends naturally and just assumed, oh, this must be what really happened. Whereas secular historians today, we know better. This is just second century and later century BS. it's the New Testament Gospels that represent the historical truth and bedrock. So the Quran is based on later legends, and secular historians would admit this, and it's the New Testament claims that are backed up historically. So you still have that problem, I would say, to deal with, right? What is more trustworthy, the secular scholarship, or just the fact that, well, hey, it's just a coincidence that some heretical Christians in the 2nd century happened to come up with the same ideas about what the Muslims say 600 years later happened. Okay, this Muslim substitution theory is based on the premise that someone was made to look like Jesus and was crucified as if he was Jesus. But the Quran says only that a likeness of him was substituted for him while he was raptured up to heaven. So the Quran actually contradicts the supernatural substitution theory here, because it says, the Quran says that someone took on Jesus' likeness and was substituted for him, not at the crucifixion, but at the time when Jesus was raptured up to heaven during the ascension. And the Gnostic teaching, believe it or not, actually parallels this. So, yeah, it's kind of clear where the Quran got its strange idea that Jesus was not really crucified, but only a likeness to him, a human figure bearing his appearance. So yeah, that's my first major objection here. And it's true that okay, so I already said that. The Quran. Now, there are some moral misapprehensions here. So what I would say is Allah is supposedly, if he's doing a supernatural act, and remember, Allah is supposedly morally perfect. He is a sinless being, as is Jesus. Even in the Quran, Jesus is described as sinless there. But Allah, as a morally perfect being, supernaturally intervened in Jesus' case to prevent his crucifixion, while at the same time making it appear that Jesus had died on the cross, either through a supernatural swoon or through supernatural substitution. But in fact, this didn't occur. Jesus lived. So this would entail a sinful act on Allah's part, because he's omniscient, so he would know beforehand that Jesus' followers would fall for this. When they saw the revived Jesus, and or the Jesus who had never been crucified because his twin was up there or a substitute was up in his place, Allah would know that the earliest Christians would be like, you must have risen from the dead, and you must be God in the flesh. I'm going to damn my soul and believe in you as God who resurrected from the dead. All because of this supernatural miracle that Allah did. And he never corrects the record. First of all, Jesus is a sinful SOB on this view, because he's allowing them to be deceived. He's not correcting their lies and saying, no, hey, that wasn't me up on the cross. That was Judas. We got him. Or what Jesus didn't say, no, Allah revived me in the tomb. I almost died, but I never died. Allah revived me in the tomb. No, Jesus is letting these fools continue on in their foolishness. And worse yet, Allah is doing the same. And he's actually the direct cause of this damnable delusion. It's not just, hey, they're deluded about how many grains of sand are on the beach. They are deluded in such a way as to damn their souls, according to Islam. They're committing the sin of shirk on this basis, right? Attributing partners to Allah. And he knew this would happen. This is a direct result of what? Their belief that Jesus had supernaturally risen from the dead as miraculous God-given vindication for his claim to be the Jewish Messiah and Son of God in the flesh. So this is just immoral. It makes Allah immoral if any of these supernatural aspects are true. Okay, so and I have a clip from J. Smith here, 17-20 minute mark. Okay, talking about this moral aspect. And what 2147. Okay.
Critical. But what's far better is, let's go to number 4, and that's the biggest evidence. eyewitness evidence, because the best evidence is people who were actually there, right?
That's right.
Because even Thallus and Phlegon were not there, or they may have been there, we don't know, but certainly they were within 20 years they're talking about it.
They were writing about it. That's right.
Tacitus was writing it a little later, but was there anybody there who was witnessing it?
Yes.
Who?
A number of people.
Number of people.
Yeah, John.
Let's say John. Let's take John.
Okay.
John's a great one, because John was right there. Now, who is John? Did John know Jesus?
Yes. He was his disciple.
He was his favorite disciple, wasn't he?
That's right. He loved him.
He loved him, and Jesus was closest to him. There was John at the foot of the cross, looking up to Jesus. Don't you think John would have known who that man was on the cross?
That's true.
Don't you think he would have known if that was another man who had Jesus' face?
That's right.
Don't you think he would have seen something wrong with that man on the cross?
He would have pointed it out.
John had been with him for 3 years. He had been with him for 3 years. He knew Jesus intimately. Certainly, he would have seen something wrong there.
That's right.
Who else was at the cross?
The mother of Jesus?
Absolutely. Mary.
Wow.
Mary was at the foot of the cross. She knew Jesus for 33 years.
That's right.
Don't you think she would have known who her son was?
She raised him up.
Come on. I don't know what Muslims are thinking when they're saying that no one was there that wouldn't recognize him. The mother of Jesus, who have known him for 33 years, she was at the foot of the cross. What do you think she was doing? She would have been the first one to say, that's not my son.
Wow, yes.
And what about the man on the cross? Don't you think he would have said something?
That's right.
You got the wrong guy. I just think, I don't know if you've seen Monty Python's Life of Brian, where he gets up there and they think, you've got the wrong man. He says, so he starts doing a jig on the cross. You've got the, listen, I'm not Jesus.
That's right.
It's just that type of scenario. It almost comes to ridicule when you stop to say, how dare Muslims assume, or how dare the Quran assume that it knows better than Mary and John. Mary, who knew Jesus intimately. John, who was his favorite disciple. They knew who Jesus was. How can they say that they were wrong?
They can't.
Number 5.
Can't. Yes.
And this is probably the one that hurts me the most. This is the one that really disturbs me. If, as the Quran suggests in Surah 4:157, God takes the image, puts it on another man, and that man takes the place of Jesus. What does that say about Jesus? If, as we now know, and it's very well affirmed, 3 days later, he comes into the upper room. There were the 10 disciples there. When he comes in, they are surprised. And he claims to be the resurrected Jesus, having never died.
It would make him a liar.
Absolutely. What does that say about Jesus, who not only then, but a week later, when Thomas comes to him, doubts him, says, how can you be here? Because I've seen you die. I was at a distance. I watched you die. How can it be you who is living again? And what did Jesus do? He showed him the holes in his hands, holes in his feet. How dare he claim to be the man that had died and risen again if he wasn't Jesus, if he hadn't done that?
He can't be righteous. He can't be sinless.
Absolutely. He has just sinned heinously, claiming for something he had not done. Can you see what that does to Jesus?
Yes.
It denigrates my prophet. It denigrates my Lord. But let's ask one more question. What kind of God, in this case Allah, what kind of God takes the image, puts it onto another man, and doesn't tell anybody?
That's not honest.
That is not honest. Not only does he not tell anybody at that time, not only did every one of those disciples believe that that was a death and resurrected God, that that was a death and resurrected Jesus, every disciple died for that belief. We know that every disciple was killed for that belief except for John. John was the only one that survived being killed. And from that time on, millions of people have believed it. And by the time of the 7th century, we know there was over 30 million people in the world that were Christians by that time. Everyone believed that Jesus died and rose again. And not one of them heard anything from God.
What happens to all these people that believe that?
Not only did they believe, what does that say about God? What does it say about Allah that he would deceive at that level?
Please tell me.
Well, yeah. I mean, to me, it's just a gas. I don't see that kind of God in this book.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it makes Allah a deceiver there, kind of thing, right? So that's the objection that I wanted to play. So the last objection to both of these supernatural alternatives, the supernatural swoon and supernatural substitution theory, is what Mike Licona has called the catch-22 argument. And this is basically, the Quran is calling Jesus a great prophet of Allah, right? So historians like Dr. Mike Licona can actually prove that Jesus, the historical Jesus, and they do this through peer-reviewed secular arguments, a total of 6 secular historical arguments, that Jesus predicted his imminent death and subsequent vindication and resurrection from the dead. We can prove this historically. Now, here's the catch-22 for Muslims. Because if the supernatural swoon theory or the supernatural switcheroo theory or substitution theory is true, this proves Jesus is a false prophet. Because if Jesus did die on the cross and rise from the dead, well, the Muslims are a problem because their Quran, Surah 4, Ayah 157 contradicts this. But if he didn't, if Surah 4 is correct, then Jesus is a false prophet. He prophesied he would die on that cross imminently. And the Quran is saying that didn't happen under divine inspiration. Either way, the Muslim is got a big problem. Either you have false divine revelation or you have false divine revelation via proving that Jesus was a false prophet. And I'm just going to have Mike Licona. It's a 8-minute video. So I'm going to have Mike Licona play this argument here.
Did Jesus actually die by crucifixion in the first century? Christians say yes, Muslims say no. Can we get through the impasse? Stay with me the next few minutes and I'll show you how. Christians and Muslims both regard Jesus as a prophet. They also agree the prophecies of a true prophet are always fulfilled. The canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, portray Jesus prophesying his imminent death on several occasions. Although historians cannot prove Jesus uttered each and every one of those predictions, they can establish with a high degree of historical certainty that Jesus prophesied his imminent death. How? Let's begin by examining 3 key texts. And Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and to rise again after 3 days. And he was stating the matter plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning around and seeing his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's." There are a number of reasons for regarding this exchange between Jesus and Peter as historical. First, we find 2 statements that are unlikely inventions of the early church, giving their embarrassing nature. Peter has the audacity to rebuke his master Jesus, who in return rebukes Peter, the same disciple who would become the lead apostle in the Jerusalem church, even calling him Satan. It's highly unlikely that Mark or the early Christians would have invented Peter's disrespect of his master, accompanied by Jesus' strong rebuke in return, calling him Satan.
So just so you know, that's the criterion of double embarrassment. There are 2 things embarrassing there that prove it is historical.
Since that would only serve to undermine Peter's authority, the very opposite thing the early church would have wanted to do. Thus, the authenticity of Jesus' saying in Mark 8:31 is supported by the criterion of embarrassment. And of course, the report is found in Mark, the earliest gospel written. Jesus was teaching his disciples and telling them, "The Son of Man is delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and having been killed, he will be raised after 3 days." The presence of a linguistic pun in this text has led many scholars to recognize the very early period in which it was being reported that Jesus predicted his imminent death. When this saying is translated back into Aramaic, which was Jesus' primary language, it reads, "The Son of Man is to be handed over to the hands of men." This pun, accompanied by a staircase structure, suggests Mark has preserved oral tradition in which Jesus predicted his death. So it is unlikely an invention of Mark. Thus, the authenticity of Jesus' saying in Mark 9:31 is supported by the criterion of early attestation. In a third text, Jesus institutes the Eucharist as a reminder to his disciples that his body and blood were about to be broken and poured out for them. These statements from the Last Supper are supported by primitive tradition in the pre-Pauline material in 1 Corinthians 11 and Luke 22, which has been preserved with striking verbal correspondence in the original Greek. This is my body, which is for you. Do this in my remembrance. This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink in my remembrance. Paul goes on in the verse that follows to say that participating in the Eucharist is to proclaim Jesus' death. And Hebrews 9:16 tells us something we already know. Before one can inherit what is promised in a will or covenant, a death is required. Independent tradition of Jesus' saying appears in Mark chapter 14. Take, this is my body. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly, I tell you, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God. It's clear that Luke and Paul drew on a common tradition, and it's very likely that tradition was independent of Mark. Accordingly, the authenticity of Jesus' statements at the Last Supper concerning his death is supported by the criteria of multiple attestation and early attestation. In summary, Jesus' predictions pertaining to his imminent death in these three texts fulfill the criteria of embarrassment, early attestation, and multiple attestation. Each of these three sayings has a strong claim to originate with Jesus. There's even more evidence that Jesus predicted his imminent death. Today, many historians of Jesus place a greater weight on the historicity of something when they observe patterns or motifs of that something. So it's quite useful when historians observe numerous other instances in the Gospels where Jesus predicts his imminent death. Although many of them do not enjoy the same historical strength as the three sayings of Jesus we just discussed, their presence throughout all four Gospels weave a very clear pattern, like verses leading to the chorus, and providing yet another reason for thinking that the earliest Christians remembered Jesus predicting his own fate. Accordingly, we can have a high degree of historical confidence that Jesus prophesied his imminent death. And if he was a true prophet of God, as both Muslims and Christians believe, we can be confident that his prophecy was fulfilled. In fact, there is abundant historical data supporting the conclusion that Jesus was crucified and died as a result.
Okay, so he's going to get into that. So I think that's really, really powerful there in terms of making my point. Look, Muslims, we can prove as secular historians, Jesus predicted his imminent death on the cross. Are you going to deny that with the Quran? And are you saying Jesus is a false prophet? Well, then you're saying the Quran is not divine revelation. It is errant. It's getting things wrong. It says Jesus is a prophet when he's a false prophet. So yeah, I think this catch-22 argument from Mike Licona is pretty devastating. Either you have Jesus a false prophet and Islam is false, or you have to affirm Jesus died by crucifixion just as he predicted. And so that's it for my presentation. I will just say, look, these arguments go against the traditional understanding, but I do side with Gabriel Said Reynolds. I think he makes a convincing argument to my mind, where I wouldn't press this issue as a defeater for Islam proper. I would just use it against specific Muslims who claim that their interpretation of Surah 4:157 denies the crucifixion. If that's true, you're done. I'm sorry, you've been refuted. So I will finally shut up, and over to you, Dane.
Oh, no, man, that was great. Thank you for that presentation. Very thorough, very insightful. We did have a comment from Elaine that I thought you could talk about. She recently heard a theory. I guess this would fall into the supernatural substitution theories, that Simon of Cyrene and Jesus switched spirits. So it looked like Jesus's body, but it wasn't his spirit within it. And Jesus's spirit hops over into Simon's body. And I think you have the deception issue once again. And you would have that same catch-22 issue again, where for a true human death, the spirit and the body have to be separated through death. And so that, switching bodies isn't exactly the same as as being separated through death. So it would
And
still, it would still kind of destroy the prophecies Jesus said. But that's and also
not
I'm
to
just going to say
mention-
this: when
And
you
not
have
to mention, just quickly, not to
Yeah.
mention Jay Smith's quick point that if this happens, Simon Asserini will be saying, "Hey, what the heck just happened? I'm not Jesus. Don't kill me." You know. So.
Yeah, something crazy has happened here. But also, I'm just going to say this: when you've gotten to the point where you're making up a theory about souls switching bodies as they carry the cross, like you're at the point of you're over explaining, like you're saying too much. It's getting too difficult to defend when it's a lot easier to just say, "Oh, Jesus died on the cross." Like that's a much easier explanation of what's going on in the history there. So something I want to talk about briefly with you, because I think if you want to, if the Muslim apologist wants to take the route of saying that Jesus didn't die by crucifixion, they're going to have to basically assume the vast majority of the New Testament is just messed up, right? Because the crucifixion of Jesus is all over the New Testament. And so they could try to get out of the catch-22 by saying, well, actually, Jesus never did prophesy that. That's a corruption in the New Testament, right? So what do we do in response? Is there anything we can do in response to somebody who just basically is going to throw out the entire New Testament as we have it today and say, well, we just don't know what's authentic and what's not because it's been so deeply corrupted? And what would be a way that we could actually talk to somebody who was thinking that way and try to help them see that's a really ridiculous claim? For me, I usually go the route that I kind of already touched on. That would require conspiracy so massive, so worldwide, so cross-cultural, that in the ancient world, I just don't know how you could possibly pull it off. Even in our modern world, with all our technology and computers and printing presses, I still think a conspiracy like that would be almost impossible to pull off. But that's probably the route I would go, is just that doesn't pass the sniff test. That doesn't pass the just basic common sense test. That every manuscript tradition, whether it's Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, the Vulgate, the Coptic, the Syriac, that all of these would be corrupted in the exact same ways. It just doesn't make sense. But how would you respond to the Muslim apologist who raised that concern?
Yeah, so twofold. So the first would be the way that Mike Lacona, real Freaky Friday. So, that's a good one. I would respond,
Simon and Jesus Freaky Friday.
So the first thing I would do is I would respond like Mike Lacona, and I would say, well, look, this isn't just a faith-based claim. We're not just quoting the Gospels as Christians. We are arguing as secular historians. Atheists and agnostics believe this based on the criteria of authenticity. And we are applying the historical method to determine these as historical facts. So if you want, sure, if a Muslim's just adamant and just, I don't care, I don't care about the evidence or being rational, I'm just blindly going to follow my book, then there's not much you can do with them. But hopefully, if you pit it, that it's not just faith claim versus faith claim or book claim versus religious book claim. No, these are, Bart Ehrman will agree with this. These are secular historical arguments based on the criteria of authenticity. The second aspect that may even convince that hard-hearted person who says, look, I don't care, I'm just going to be irrational, I believe whatever's in the Quran. Well, the Quran itself says that the Gospels or the Injil is not corrupted and that you should learn Christian doctrine. So your own book says that you want to learn what Christians teach about Jesus, you go and ask the Christians to teach you the gospel message, the Injil. And the Quran says it was not corrupted. I would argue it doesn't say that the things were corrupted. This is a later Muslim belief after the time of Muhammad, maybe 100 years or so afterwards, or a little less. Once they start engaging with Christians in the lands they've conquered, and they start realizing, oh my gosh, this isn't what Muhammad said. So then they came up with this ad hoc thing. Oh, well, your scriptures are corrupted. That was not what I would argue the historical Muhammad believed, and that's not what the Quran says. So that would be the 1-2 punch that I would give.
Yeah, that's great. I think that piece about the Injil and that the Quran, it endorses the Gospels. So they're in another catch-22. Either the Gospels are genuinely preserved, or Allah failed to preserve his word and allowed his word to get tarnished and corrupted by his own enemies. That seems kind of weak for an all-powerful God. And so you're kind of in a catch-22 there. You either accept the Gospels as written, or you have to swallow the bitter pill of, well, my God didn't preserve his word. So yeah, you know, the Muslim apologist is going to be confronted with a lot of rock and hard place situations. I think the more they try to spin their way out of it.
Exactly. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So it's a tough position to be in. I mean, their Quran arguably puts them in this weird place with this Surah 4:157. So yeah, if you're going to take that traditional interpretation, good luck to you. But
right.
I think it's clear where the rational, reasonable person will believe, and that is that Jesus died on the cross as a certain historical fact of history.
Yeah, I agree with you that it's an indisputable fact, and something that a lot of people maybe fail to realize or haven't heard before is just how amazing our evidence of Jesus in the New Testament manuscripts really is in comparison to other books of the ancient world. So, you know, we have like 5,000, I'm using round numbers, but we have something like 5,000 manuscripts, and some of them date as early as the 2nd century. And this is just unheard of in ancient textual transmission. I think one of the texts that was about a war that one of the Caesars fought, and it's famous, and I can't remember what it is, but you know, everyone agrees that it is basically a good historical accurate account, and there's only like 10 copies, and the closest one to the event itself is like 800 years after. But historians basically say, well, this is probably essentially giving us a good picture of what actually happened. So if they're willing to take at face value 10 manuscripts 800 years later, just think about how awesome it is that we have 5,000 manuscripts, some of them, you know, just decades after the New Testament events. And this shouldn't surprise us because, again, it's God acting in history through the preservation of these manuscript traditions, enriching the church with this, and also allowing the church to have greater trust in the word itself. So, I mean, the authenticity of the Gospels, that's and the whole New Testament, the authenticity of them being preserved well and the historicity of them, that's a whole nother video, but people can they can breathe easy. Like these are well-preserved documents.
Yeah, I find it, I mean, there's 5,600 manuscripts, and that's just in the original language, Greek. I mean, we have thousands more manuscripts in other languages and stuff. And so in terms of the preservation of the text, the New Testament has been remarkably well preserved. And this is, you know, the science of lower textual criticism. Again, Bart Ehrman, who is an expert in this area, they will all attest 95% of the New Testament is what the original autographs would have contained. And in terms of the variants that we have in our manuscripts, the vast majority are things like spelling errors or word order, or as Bart Ehrman likes to say, parablipsis on occasion of homo italieton, so that it has the same ending. So they oh, I've already written that, so they don't write it. Little mistakes like that, right? Nothing affects a theological doctrine or a major historical teaching or anything like that. By contrast, you'll always hear with Muslims, oh, well, the Quran, this has been supernaturally and miraculously preserved. But actually, Quranic textual criticism is actually just coming in. And I'm friends with Louis Dizon, who's an expert in the languages, and he actually just had Bart Ehrman and a Muslim scholar. They're actually teaching a class on biblical textual criticism versus Quranic textual criticism. So they're both, Bart Ehrman and this Muslim scholar is the professor. It was on Reason and Theology podcast just maybe a week ago or something. But yeah, the Quran is not preserved. All of the problems with the New Testament are the exact same, if not worse, with the Quran. And it's made much worse because we have a lot less quantity of the manuscripts, which means it's harder for us to tell what is an error, what's not, what goes back to the original. Plus, we have this event. We have Yemeni manuscripts, which blatantly contradict the Quranic text. There are major variants affecting actual doctrinal teachings and meanings. That's not a problem we have with the New Testament. And also, the final thing I'll say with the Quranic text, we have this bottleneck problem with the Caliph, the fourth rightly guided Caliph, Uthman, where it says he destroyed, there was so many problematic versions of the Quran, like he destroyed it all, he got rid of all that, and he made the definitive text decades after Muhammad had already died of the Quran. So at the very best, just taking Islamic history the way Muslims want you to, the best we have is, okay, this is the Quran Uthman, the Caliph Uthman wanted us to have. And even there, we've seen the preservation of that has not been good enough. So yeah, so when it comes to New Testament textual criticism, I'll take that any day over Quranic textual criticism.
Amen. Amen to that. So yeah, and I guess all this is kind of setting the stage for our discussion with Shabir Ali, which is coming up. And I know Tyler said the date earlier, but it's May 21st. May 21st? Yeah, May 21st. So people can mark their calendar for that. We're going to be talking to a very well-respected Muslim apologist, Shabir Ali. He's a good guy. It's going to be a friendly, interesting conversation. And we're going to talk about the Trinity, and we're going to talk about the crucifixion of Jesus. And I'll be interested to see what direction he goes with trying to account for Surah 4 and to account for Jesus's prophecies about himself and to account for the text of the New Testament itself. So it'll be a really interesting conversation. And I think that you've done a great job here tonight of setting the stage for the mountain he has to climb, to make his case. And here's the other thing that I think is so cool, and you've highlighted this already, but I just want to underline it. The case that Dale's made here tonight is really not just a fundamentalist Christian Bible thumper saying, look, it says right here, Jesus died. We're talking about the criteria of embarrassment, right? We're talking about the criteria of, all the ones that were mentioned. People can go back and watch it. I'm off the top of my head. But we're talking about things that even our own sort of skeptical critics in Western Christian culture that teach at our universities, even they come to the belief that Jesus of Nazareth died, right? And so, and died by crucifixion at that. And so the case that you've laid out tonight, it's more than just a conservative Christian case, although we of course agree with it, but it's a wider case than that is basically the case of Western cultural scholarship. And so Shabir Ali or any other Muslim apologist, they're going to have to go through not just the sort of just raw, this is what the church teaches and we're believers, but also the scholarship that's like, it's pretty irrefutable that Jesus died by crucifixion. And so all of that was just to say this case is broader than a lot of people may realize. The side that we're on is very well respected, even amongst our own critics, which shows you just the weight and the force of our arguments.
Exactly. None of the arguments I gave tonight were based on biblical inerrancy or even the general reliability. I know Dane mentioned some points about the general reliability. Look, when arguing with Muslims, I just granted them as much as I could. Fine, the Gospels are full of contradictions, errors. There is later legendary material there, but even granting the Muslim all of that for the sake of argument, that's not true. But I'm just going to be charitable to the Muslim. I can still prove with near absolute certainty that it is a historical fact that Jesus died due to crucifixion. We have those secular criteria of authenticity. This is someone like C.B. McCulloch. He's not an evangelical Christian. They endorse secular historians as part of the historical method. They employ these criteria to glean what is a fact, even from the most corrupted and legendary texts. Historians can still glean facts, even in the worst of historical sources. How? Through using these criteria of authenticity. And on that front, we saw that the fact that Jesus died by crucifixion, it satisfies the criterion of embarrassment, criterion of dissimilarity, the criterion of enemy attestation, the criterion of early eyewitness testimony, and multiple independent attestation. Those are just 5 of the criteria that I employed tonight to prove the historical facts. Nowhere did I say, oh, well, the Bible says and it's inerrant, or the Bible says and it's generally reliable, so we should believe this part. No, we proved the specific components that I was using. So yeah.
Yeah. Right on, man. Well, thank you, Dale. I know you put a lot of effort into that, and I really appreciate it. It's really interesting, and I agree with everything that you said. I think you did a great job, and I think we'll wrap up. Just so everybody knows, once again, May 21st, we're going to have kind of a part 2 to this. May 21st, we're going to have a part 2 to this with Shabir Ali. And so we'll actually be interacting with a Muslim, and I think it's going to be really fruitful and engaging. And we may continue some of these topics on Islam for a while, because there's a lot of different, there's just a lot of different ways to go about trying to reach the Muslim believer and them to Christianity, or at least, even if you can't convert them, at least get them thinking in some new ways, and at least get some mutual respect and understanding flowing back and forth. So that's going to be cool. Y'all know that we love putting out this content because it's a passion, and we do it for Jesus and for his glory. But if you ever do want to help us out financially, there's ways to give to us through all sorts of ways, through super chats, through PayPal, through all the different ways. And that's all in the description. And of course, Dale and Real Seekers, there's ways to give to him as well. So you can go find his YouTube channel and support what he's doing as well. Again, we'll do it for free because we just love Jesus and want to get his name out there. But, if you ever want to send us something so that we can get nicer equipment, or maybe just buy a steak dinner, we'll take it. So thank you all for being here tonight. And we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Dale, you want to say any last things before we wrap up?
So I guess, thank you for having me. I know it was a bit long in part, so obviously when Shabir is here, I'm going to have to work on condensing that info for sure. Troy, excellent. He loved the episode, and the death and miraculous resurrection of Christ may just be the most attested fact of ancient history.
I think so.
Sounds good. So yeah, I hope it was helpful to the audience and stuff. I know there was a lot there, like I said. In terms of Real Seekers, my next episode will be on Faith Unaltered on Friday with philosopher Clay Jones. But one thing I did do that's important for the Faith Unaltered crew today, I did a show with Guy Powell and on the Shroud of Turin and the carbon dating. And he is trying to get people to sign a petition to have the 1988 carbon-14 dating paper that was published in Nature retracted, because now we've mathematically proven, that they fudged the data and the conclusions were flawed. They do not have that 95% degree of confidence. And without that, statistically, if you have more than two sigma levels, it's garbage. The data is garbage. You can't rely on it. So we're trying to get that done. And as Dane mentioned, I'm not set up to take money at this point. Obviously, I've always tried my best to do things for free. I've been resistant about wanting to make money. I am reaching a point where I might open it up to let you guys contribute on YouTube if you would ever want to, or Patreon or something like that. So, yep, I could use I can use some extra money always, but whether I get it or not, I'm still going to be here giving the content because I see this as me giving value for you guys. And it's not about just making money. I want to serve Christ. I really want to do that. And so, yeah, I may set that up at some point soon. But again, just remember, whether you give me a single dime or not, I will be here serving Christ regardless. So, yeah.
Amen. Yep. No, it's definitely not about the money. It's about the glory of Christ. And we're gonna put content up, multiple times a week, nonstop, regardless of anything. But we also know that sometimes God does put on people's hearts to be generous, and if that happens to you, we will gladly accept. But no, it's all for Jesus, and I hope that comes through, and I hope that shines through here on Faith Unaltered and on Real Seekers as well. So, yeah, we'll wrap up. This is kind of a hybrid, Faith Unaltered and Three Crowns. That's why we've got the Faith Unaltered background, but the Three Crowns logo, because it's sort of a little bit of both. But since I'm doing the outro, I'll do it my own way, my Three Crowns way. So receive now this benediction. Holy Father, Holy Son, Holy Spirit, three we name thee. Though in essence only one, undivided God we claim thee. And adoring, we bend the knee while we own the mystery. This has been an episode of Faith Unaltered and sort of kind of Three Crowns. Thanks to Dale for being here. And until next time, everybody, stay rooted in Christ. Peace.
Take care.